I've been to Chernobyl, so I've seen firsthand the consequences of human error, which could have been avoided. And obviously what happened in Japan tested the extremes of a natural circumstance. And we appreciate very much the type of preparations that we're all doing to try to make sure that regardless of the severity of an external factor, we have safe nuclear facilities. The circumstances in Japan clearly tested our capacity and reminds us that we have to manage these risks as best that we can. In the state of Maryland, we have Culver Cliffs, which is located less than 50 miles from here by air, and within around 3.3 million people live within the 50 miles of Culver Cliffs. So we have a direct interest, not only the state of Maryland, but as people who work in the Washington area, to make sure that all precautions are taken. I want to ask first, Madam Chair, if my entire statement could be made part of the record. And I want to question on another potential danger that was recognized several decades ago, and the Commission took steps then by issuing regulations, which is my understanding may not have been fully implemented, and that is the risk from fire at a nuclear plant and the impact it could have on its generation capacity to prevent the appropriate cooling of the nuclear material. Can you bring me up to date as to where we are on proper protections at our nuclear facilities from the danger of fire?
Sure. Thank you very much, Senator, for that question. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you. Welcome to the committee as a confirmed
Thank you.
Chairman.
Thank you. In terms of fire, the staff has issued a fire protection standard and is working with licensees to implement this standard, and many of the licensees are actively involved in implementing this standard. And I invite my colleagues to elaborate if they would like to.
Also, if you could comment, because I believe there were regulations issued several decades ago. It's my understanding that not all the power plants are necessarily in full compliance with those requirements.
That's correct.
Fire was identified as a significant contributor to risk a long time ago, 30 years maybe or more. And of course the fire at Browns Ferry in the 1970s sensitized people to it. And at that time the first regulation was issued, the so-called Appendix R to the Code of Federal Regulations, which was very deterministic and based on experience. For example, critical trays should have 20 feet of empty space between them or a fire barrier and so on. And that Appendix R turned out to be very difficult to implement, and a lot of the licensees complained. I believe we reached something like granting about 1,000 exemptions, and anytime you have 1,000 exemptions, that means the rule is not very good. So then the National Fire Protection Association, and we participated in that, issued the standard, which is now called NFPA 805, which is a combination of probabilistic and deterministic methods, more modern than Appendix R, but it's voluntary. And I believe last time I heard 35 licensees or around there have agreed to do this, and some of them have submitted already their re-evaluation of the fire risk. Our staff is reviewing those submissions. And I think it's primarily licensees that felt that implementing Appendix R for them was very difficult, or for whatever reason they didn't want to do it.
Well, I would just make this observation to this committee. You have a responsibility to do everything you can for safety, and this committee has a responsibility on oversight, and we work together. The tragedy you referred to, I believe, was in the 1970s, so it's far removed from the current thought process. If there were a fire at a nuclear plant that put us at risk, I would expect we'd be having a hearing today on the fire risks. I don't want to have that hearing. I want to make sure that we have in place the precautions that are reasonable to mitigate or eliminate this risk factor. And I would just ask that you keep this committee informed as to how that review is taking place. It just disturbs me that there are nuclear power plants that are not in compliance with a regulation, or there are 1,000 waivers that have been issued. You're absolutely right. We need compliance, and we need regulations that provide the protection and are achievable. And I would just ask, Madam Chair, that this committee be advised as to the progress that you're making in regards to this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. So I have just, you'll be happy to know, one last question. Chairman Macfarlane, the Union of Concerned Scientists has reported that the reactors at Diablo Canyon and San Onofre are out of compliance with the NRC's fire safety regulations and have been for some time now. The Union of Concerned Scientists believes the lack of NRC enforcement of fire safety regulations is one of the biggest threats to nuclear safety in this country. Now, that's a very strong indictment that they are making. Why does the NRC allow plants to keep operating out of compliance with these fire safety rules? That's what the Union of Concerned Scientists say. Do you agree with that? Do you allow plants to keep operating out of compliance with the NRC's own fire safety regulations?
Thank you for the question, and I appreciate the concerns raised by the Union of Concerned Scientists. Every plant in this country is either in compliance with the fire safety regulations or they have taken approved or compensatory actions.
One moment. So the NRC has provided them with an alternative to the regulations. Is that correct?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
So the NRC has provided an alternative to the regulations? In other words, some of them are operating without being in full compliance with the regulations, and you've given them an alternative.
We've given them potential alternative actions that they can take to make sure that they are safe in terms of a fire. Let me ask Commissioner Apostolakis to elaborate.
As I said earlier, I'm sorry. It's Appendix R was the original regulation that led, because of its inadequacies, to this National Fire Protection Association standard. The standard is voluntary. About 35 licensees, again, if my memory serves me, have agreed to enter this standard, and once they enter, they cannot get out. Now, as they find maybe inadequacies according to the Appendix R when they are implementing NFPA 805, there is enforcement discretion. We don't penalize them for it as long as they tell us what they're going to do about it and by when. These are minor things, and usually there are compensatory measures.
They're what? I'm sorry.
Maybe that's what there are compensatory measures to account for these weaknesses. So it's not that they don't comply with the regulations. I mean, there is this period where they will be allowed to take action to correct whatever weaknesses they have.
1 minute.
Yeah.
Well, I'm confused, I have to admit. I'm sorry. Forgive me. So my understanding is that the NRC has fire safety regulations. Are these regulations, or are these just a idea that you're putting out for power plants? If they want to do it, they can do it, and if they don't want to do it, they don't have to do it. Chairman?
They are, oh, I'm sorry.
No, there are regulations in place.
So they're not voluntary, they have to?
No, they are.
Okay. So I don't know how many are on this list here but it must be, let me see, 10, 20, 30, 40. How many? 17 states, about 31 reactors that are not in compliance. And what I'm hearing from you is you give them they come forward with other ways to get you to forbear. And how much time do you give them to comply?
To comply with the regulations?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let me turn to Commissioner Apostolakis or Commissioner Magwood.
I was going to try to give an illustration that might clarify this a bit. Part of the rule, the regulation that fire protection falls under is called Appendix R in our lexicon. And under Appendix R, for example, we look for the separation of, say, control cables. And control cables would have to be a certain distance apart or be protected by some barrier or some combination of the two. An alternative to actually moving the cables further apart might be to station a person at the location, or to have a person check every half an hour at that location to make sure there's no fire taking place. That's a compensatory measure, and that's the sort of thing a lot of the licensees are doing. And those measures can stay in place for quite some time.
Well, from what I know about the reactors in my state, there's personnel problems there by the handful. Somebody's supposed to be someplace they're not, somebody falls asleep. I just want to say this is concerning. And I don't think you're that concerned, all of you, but it's okay. It's a disagreement. I feel you need to get these plants up to code in terms of, we would not allow this in a lot of areas. And I'll tell you something. I served as a county supervisor, and you better pay attention to fire regulations. I was just at the Democratic convention, which was great, in parentheses. And you should have seen the fire marshal there. Seriously. Whoa. Get out of the aisle. I don't care if you're on CNN, MSNBC, you get out of the aisle. They told senators and everybody else. This isn't something we should be giving them compensatory ways to do it, because then you're putting it in the charge of a human being, and we know human error occurs in the best of people. So I guess what I'd like to do is, not today, because, sir, this is kind of the first I've really learned about this, and I want to thank you for this. I would like to work with all of you to figure out a way. I think the people in these communities ought to know that their nuclear power plants are not in compliance. Let them start to write letters and say, hey, get into gear here and fix it up. I've got problems. I've got problems in California. I've got my 2 power plants on here. We've got enough problems. We not only have the problem with the tubes, we've got this problem. So what I can tell you that I'm going to work on with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle is sending you a letter in short order that I think we need transparency. I think you ought to chastise these folks by just having a website and say, hey, go up and see who is in compliance. Let's have the good list. This is the thing that always gets me. There are so many people who are doing the right thing here. And then they look over and they're spending the money making the capital improvements, and then you have people who are putting it off until something happens, and then they'll have an excuse. And they'll say, well, the NRC said we could compensate, blah, blah, blah. And I don't want to get you into that situation. So not today, but in the next few weeks, we will do a letter with some of our colleagues, hopefully on both sides, that just says, please bring the attention of this failure to comply with your own regulations to the people, because my sense of it is the minute my city councilmen know and my mayors know, they're going to be on the phone to the PG&E in the one case and SoCal Ed and the other and say, hey, we don't accept this. It's not right. So anyway, I don't want to end on a down note at all. I think we can work on this, and I really thank the staff here for all their work on this. We'll get this done. But I just want to say, in general, I'm really happy to see the cooperation, the respect. We may have disagreements between you, and you know what? That's fine. That's part of what America's about. I don't expect you all to agree. That's why I keep asking, do you agree, do you not? Don't be fearful to disagree with one another. I think it's healthy, too. But I am so pleased to see the working relationship that is beginning to develop here, and that the personalities are meshing better. And that's extremely important. And we all want the same thing. You know, we want safety first. And you do, I do, everybody does. Whether you love nuclear power, whether you hate wind power, you know, wherever you're coming to, President Obama has an all-of-the-above strategy. So it's all got to be safe. And I think most people have an all-of-the-above strategy, and it all has to be safe. Whether it's natural gas or nuclear, solar, or whatever. So thank you, thank you. I hope you feel, as I do, that we're all on the same page for now. May not always be, but we are now.